Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia and another beautiful day to grow. What plans are you hatching in the patch this week? A little bit of planting? What about a new project? Well, I'm sure we've got something to inspire you.
As the cooler weather really starts to bite, you need to garden smart to keep the produce coming. And I'm going to show you how.
Australia is synonymous with eucalypts, and quite incredibly, we're home to nearly 800 native species of them. Well, another species has been discovered after lying dormant for 70 years in the archives and collection here at the National Herbarium of New South Wales. Now, it's critically endangered, and I'm here to find out how science is helping us identify and preserve these great trees.
Low on space but big on ideas? I've got the perfect project for you. Transforming an unused trolley into a herb and veggie vertical garden.
And I'm visiting an artist's garden that never skips a beat, with every corner filled with handmade mosaics and colour year-round.
When well designed, our public spaces can do so much for the local community and the local wildlife. Jerry's found a project that's providing all that and more.
Here at Brisbane's Hanlon Park, Baroda, you'll find a thriving community open space with kids playing in the creek, thousands of plants lining the waterways and wildlife habitat in between. But it hasn't always been this way. I'm here to discover how a council redevelopment project turned this sterile tract of inner city land with a huge concrete drain smack bang in the middle of it into a valuable asset for the environment and the community that now enjoys it. So, Alan, what was this place like 100 years ago?
It's hard to believe, but it would have been a natural creek, meandering with lots of trees around it.
Alan Hoban is a Director of Stormwater Australia and an environmental engineer with Bly Tanner, the principal design contractor for Brisbane City Council on this, its flagship park project, the redevelopment of Hanlon Park. And what was it like after it was rechannelized?
Well, then it became a straight concrete drain. The engineers 100 years ago had one focus, which was flooding and drainage and getting water as quickly as possible. Had a concrete drain and just, boring grass beside it.
So how did this project actually come to be?
It's people power, community demand. The local catchment group recognised that something better could be done here and they advocated for it.
Was this project a big challenge?
Oh, it's an incredible challenge, 10 years in the making.
So what considerations were there in choosing plants?
Well, it's a real challenge because we've got a whole lot of areas that are really dry and some are really wet, some in fast-flowing environments. So a key part of it is making sure there's a lot of diversity because it's really hard to be specific about which plants will thrive in which environment.
Commencing in 2020, half a kilometre of concrete channel was ripped out and replaced to make way for the new design. There was an awful lot of concrete in the culvert. What happened to it?
Well, ordinarily that would have been dug up and sent to landfill, but everyone knows that's not a great thing, and also there's a huge environmental footprint in producing concrete. So wherever we've needed concrete throughout the site, in such as these retaining walls or to armour parts of the creek where there's high velocities, we're reusing as much of the concrete as possible.
That's brilliant. We're sitting on it.
Yeah, that's right.
There must have been a lot of excavation. Were there any surprises along the way?
Look, quite a number of surprises. A lot of these creeks were backfilled with all sorts of waste back in the day. So we found car bodies and tyres and a whole lot of waste. It was also used as a camp for American soldiers back in the Second World War, so we found old American Coca-Cola bottles and the like.
Oh, wow. Huge amounts of soil were removed and relocated as a new waterway was cut into the site. Far longer, deeper and more indirect than the previous one. This slows the water flow and allows it to soak out into the landscape. Now, we've had some flood events recently. How did this stand up to the test?
I had a few sleepless nights, but it's held up really well. We've had probably 4 flood events come through the site during construction and early days of establishment, and it's held up amazingly well. We've lost a few little plants and a little bit of scour here and there, but you'd expect that because the site's really young and the plants hadn't really taken root. But now that the plants are starting to take hold, we're really looking forward to it being really resilient and being challenged by the next flood.
The lengthened watercourse allowed for planting to provide a riparian habitat, a term used for the plants and ecosystems directly adjacent to rivers, creeks, streams and wetlands. They provide critical habitat for insects, birds and amphibians and are often the most fertile parts of the landscape, and yet they're under threat from erosion and land clearing. So how many trees and other plants went into this project?
We've got over 460 trees have been planted and about 53,000 ground covers and other plants.
Wow. And are they all indigenous species?
They're all indigenous, and there's a whole lot of different planting zones along a site like this.
The trees were chosen for their ability to grow quickly and establish a good canopy. And local Melaleuca species have performed this role particularly well.
So closer to the water's edge, we've got trees like Melaleuca quinquenervia and swamp box that are happy to have wet feet, and then some emergent macrophytes like Lepronia articulata, Bomia articulata, and they're doing really well along the water's edge.
Another essential job is oxygenation of the water, and Alan says the Bomia species have really outdone themselves.
But the plants play a really important role in the health of the creek. First of all, they help hold the soil together. So we get really fast flowing water through here, so those plants act like green infrastructure. They're binding the soil, and if we get a lot of plants, that means we can use a lot less rock to hold the creek together. So the plant stems act like little snorkels and then provide oxygen into the benthic sediments, and that helps with a whole lot of nutrient processing and all those factors that together help create a healthy waterway.
Outside of the ecological efforts, there's been a real focus on engaging children with their environment through nature play. Stepping stones across the creek encourage kids to get up close and into the water, and a low-lying bridge runs close to the water's edge, allowing for wheelchair access.
It's a really important part of this growing philosophy of nature play, finding places for kids to play in and around creeks, and it's what I used to do as a kid and most people did, and so we're now creating those opportunities again.
It really contrasts with the functional sterility of an average playground, doesn't it?
That's right. I reckon one of the big measures of success on this project for me will be if there's more kids playing in the creek than playing in the local playground.
The result is stunning, melding both an interesting and high-quality public open space for the community to enjoy with a significant resource for local biodiversity and greater flood resilience. When you started this project, you must have had a vision.
Well, the vision was really about creating delight for the community. We see a lot of money, millions of dollars spent on grey infrastructure, on roads and things, just to save a minute out of your day on your commute. It's about green infrastructure and placemaking. So what we want to do is use the public money to create places where you spend time, not save time. You spend an hour, spend a day, and really enjoy some nature in the city.
And how has the community responded?
Fantastically. Just seeing the number of people using the park. For me, the best moment was on opening day, just seeing kids immediately get in the creek and moving rocks around and just reclaiming their creek, which they hadn't been able to do for over 100 years.
And the kids aren't the only ones loving this new space. It's becoming a haven for local wildlife, even at this early stage.
So we're seeing turtles, kingfishers, there's a whole lot of bird life. The fish life's great. We're seeing about a 4-fold increase in fish numbers, a big proportion of native freshwater fish, which is really interesting in a creek like this. And it's still early days, so as the plants start to grow, we get more tree cover, we'll start to see more and more species diversity through this site.
And in the scale of things, how big is this project Australia-wide?
This is the biggest creek naturalisation project in Australia, so it's really impressive at that scale. But what I'm really hopeful of is that this continues to inspire other projects around the country, so we see these in all neighbourhoods around Australia.
Well, I think you're doing a brilliant job here.
Thank you.
This project shows that with vision, planning and planting, even utilitarian open space can be converted into something magical. This project delivers on social and ecological levels, and it completes what Mother Nature intended, It's a return to the past.
What causes hydrophobic soil? As the name suggests, hydrophobic soil repels water, and it's caused by waxy material from breaking down organic matter, coating particles of soil. And sandy soil is particularly vulnerable because of its small surface area to particle ratio. Also, hydrophobic soil becomes worse in dry conditions, and sand quickly dries out. The best way to treat it is to apply a liquid wetting agent in the first instance, and then try and keep the soil moist. Also, keep the soil nice and healthy, because microbial activity can help break down that waxy coating.
Can I chop out tree roots that are starting to lift up pavements or becoming trip hazards in the lawn? The answer to this is you need to be wary. That this is a stabilising arm of the tree, and once that's cut, it will destabilise the tree and it could blow over in the next strong wind. The other thing is the root is a feeding system, and once you cut off that feeding system, you're limiting the food to the tree and it could become sick as a result and stressed. So the short answer is think twice before you cut these roots.
What is the best orientation to install a new veggie bed? Well, for low-growing crops, such as lettuces, carrots, beets and cabbages, it's best to have a north-south orientation. That way, they all get sun on both sides of the crop as the sun passes through the sky during the day. Be aware though, with taller crops such as tomatoes, peas, beans and even corn, they will cast shadow, so make sure that they're not shading other nearby crops.
I'm sure most of you have felt a few cold mornings of late. There's no denying the cooler weather is on the way. And in the Central Highlands of Victoria, Millie is getting ready.
In my book, every moment in the garden is beautiful. There's always something to stop, to see, and of course to revere. But as that gentle decline into autumn heads down that slippery, icy slope into the depths of winter, there is also some work to do. At the peak of summer, when you are absolutely drowning in zucchinis and tomatoes, it can be hard to think that you'll ever go hungry, but in the cooler months here, growth almost stops still. And that means that pretty much everything that I have to eat and harvest over the next few months is already in the garden. You really have to harvest smart, and a lot of that comes down to understanding the plants that you're growing. Take something like broccoli. It might seem really straightforward, but there are loads of different varieties that you can grow. Some produce a good, solid head. Once you cut that off, really that plant is not going to give you anything more. Others, once you cut the main head off, they'll actually produce a few side shoots, so it's worth leaving them in the ground a little bit longer to harvest them. And then others still, like my spigarello, well, that is a sprouting type of broccoli. I harvest these little tips right throughout the cooler months, and then in late winter and early spring, it produces lots of tiny florets. So the better you know the plant, the more you'll get to eat from it. Just left a couple of those little side shoots to develop, and I'll come back for them next week. I even harvest my weeds in a strategic way in winter. One of the most common weeds that I have in the garden is celery. It comes up in lots of places and I love it and use it a lot. So instead of pulling it out when I first see it, I wait until it starts to become too big for the plants it's growing with. It obviously needs to come out, and then I harvest it for the kitchen. One thing that's really important to ensure that you eat well right through winter is to take note of anything that's gone really well. This is my coriander crop, and a lot of people struggle to grow it. And the problem they commonly have is timing. They try and grow it in the warmer months where it just bolts to flower and seed, it rushes through its life cycle. Whereas I've been sowing seed every few weeks from January through February and March, and you can see what the result is here. I've got successive crops which I'll be able to continue to harvest right through the winter months. This can just freeze solid and then thaws out and is right to harvest. For me, this is a great success, so I've made a note that I'm going to do it the same way again next year. To keep the harvest coming right through winter, you need to feed your food. But in the cooler months when that soil is cold, there are some nutrients that can be hard for those plants to get. So a simple way to get around it is to use a liquid fertiliser in a watering can. It's about 8 litres of water. I'm pretty fussy about my measurements. Just put a slurp. I go quite weak because I do it quite regularly, every couple of weeks, onto all those leafy greens, the broccolis, the radicchios, they all love it, and that'll make sure that you've got those crops coming. Any gardener knows that one of the best ways to feed plants is actually to feed the soil, and particularly in a productive garden. Every time you put a crop in, you grow it really quickly, and then you pull it out of the ground to feed yourself those nutrients, you're of course depleting them out of the soil. And one of the simplest ways to do it is to use a green manure. Now that's where you're using plants much like you would animal manures to add organic matter and nutrients into the soil. And there's lots of really specific things you can use. Legumes are a really common one because the bacteria attached to their roots helps to fix nitrogen. That's things like peas and broad beans, and in summertime you'd use beans. But there are loads of different things you can incorporate. Here I've got some mustards and then a whole lot of brassica seeds that are basically run out of date. They're not really viable enough to use as my regular seed sows, but I can chuck them in here, and if they work, well, they'll be perfect for improving the soil. And to make this seed a bit easier to spread evenly, I'm going to mix it into a little bit of soil, and then I'll go and prep the bed. Preparing the bed by raking back all the old straw, working across the surface with a fork to loosen. Sowing this is fun. Just sprinkle it over the surface, you don't have to be fussy. And then give it a gentle tease to work it into the soil surface. These will germinate and grow relatively slowly over the next couple of months, but they're doing good while they're there. When they get to about knee height, I'm going to chop them up and loosen the top of the soil and let them rot down, because essentially they're here to be organic matter for this garden bed. But the other benefit of this particular green manure crop is that everything I put in that mix is edible as a seed, which means from this garden bed, I'm also going to get continuous harvests until I need to dig it back in. Getting extra value out of a piece of real estate in a winter garden is always worthwhile. Then again, every moment in the garden is.
If there's one scent that said Australia to me, it would have to be the distinctive aroma of our eucalypts. It takes me straight back to my childhood running around the bush on my godfather's property in the Bylong Valley near Mudgee. We're all so familiar with these amazing plants, but there's always more to learn. And Clarence is with a team who've discovered a new eucalypt to add to the list.
These rammed earth buttresses are bolts capable of withstanding bushfires, repelling insect invaders and maintaining low humidity and temperatures to preserve the over 1.4 million specimens here at the National Herbarium of New South Wales. Now, behind this formidable and elegant architecture, many discoveries are just waiting to be made. And I'm here to see the latest a new species of eucalyptus to add to the nearly 800 species that we already have. Part of the team identifying the new kid on the block is Dr. Trevor Wilson, an evolutionary biologist here at the Botanic Gardens. Thank you. This is so impressive. What goes on here?
Well, you're looking at a vast repository of research specimens that scientists can look at morphology and other structures of plants. We can sequence DNA in the lab next door.
And this is the vault?
This is Vault 5, yeah. And in here, we've got most of our eucalypt species.
Yeah, so this is all Myrtaceae?
All Myrtaceae here, including all the eucalypt species we have in the collection.
So what are we looking at here, Trevor?
Now, we've got a few different specimens from the collection, including the species that we're talking about today, which is Eucalyptus species cati. I've got 2 specimens here dating back to the 1960s. The specimen has the reproductive structures such as the flower buds and the eucalyptus capsules that are the fruit. These set of plants, which come from the Sydney region, weren't known to be a species, but it looked similar to a few other trees. So we couldn't decide whether or not it was just variation of one species that we know already or a distinct species.
So the specimen itself has been in the collection for a long time, but you've been waiting for the technology to catch up to positively identify?
Yep. The beauty of this collection is that we can still study the reproductive structures and bark and whatever to identify better a species, but now we can bring in molecular technology and use DNA as well as another perspective to get an even stronger framework to identify species. Now we can go forward and give this plant a new species name, Eucalyptus species cati.
Thus the discovery of a new species.
Correct, yeah.
Oh, wow. And I guess that's the thing back in the day, it was, looking at flower form and leaf shape and bark and all of those things. Now being able to hone in on a cellular level now too as well.
Exactly, yeah. We've got a full new perspective and finding potentially even more species in the collection.
With the new species that you've discovered, what are you doing to conserve that particular species?
So we've not only got dead specimens here, but we have the capacity to, with our seed collection at the plant bank, reproduce new seedlings to ensure the survival of the species. Thought you might actually like to see some.
Yeah, you've got them here.
Yes.
That'd be great.
Yep,
all right.
This is the shade house where we've been growing up saplings to grow up Eucalyptus species cati for translocation into the wild.
Because it has an amazing form. The habit of this is quite interesting, given it's a eucalypt.
This is what's so cool about having saplings. We actually have one of its diagnostic characters already growing on it, which is this lignotuber. It's a mallee tree, like many other eucalypts, that don't grow a single stem trunk. And it's all owing to this below-ground stem swelling that we call a lignotuber.
So most of the energy is really going under the ground to help survive anything that happens above ground.
Yeah, because it can be burnt off right to the ground, and then as regrowth occurs, multiple branches come out. And now this and a few other plants are ready to go into a new secret translocation site.
In a sense, future-proofing the survival of the species.
Yep.
It's got to be great to see this growing, but do you have any of this particular species in mature form?
Yeah, surprisingly, we actually do have one in the living collection, and I can show it to you right now.
All right.
Yeah.
So what got you into the world of Australian botany?
Well, I came over here from Canada on a botanical backpacking holiday and just fell in love and became immersed with the crazy biota that's here. And ever since, I've been studying and researching Australian plants. So Clarence, this is the adult Eucalyptus species cati that we've had in the gardens. Germinated from seed and grown up and planted here about 15 years ago. At the time, we didn't even know it was actually a distinct species. But of course, Now we do, and we've got this valuable specimen in our collection that we can cross-reference with herbarium material and wild populations. This is the only adult cat-eye in the living collections. It's a great example of some of the good diagnostic characters of the species, including the eximius or flaky bark of the species and these flower buds, which have quite a good distinct shape from the closest relatives of the species.
And the benefit of having the specimen in the herbarium, you've been able to cross-reference.
That's right, yeah, and take genetic material from this one and the seedlings that we've grown up and the herbarium material.
It must feel great being part of a team that's literally made a new discovery.
It feels really amazing and exciting to be part of a team that's coming in on a project like this from government sectors and science and horticulture to make this all possible to save endangered species.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, guest presenter Jude shows us how to make the most magical of gardening ingredients, compost. We meet a scientist studying our fascinating, diverse and critical native bees. And I get you tooled up and fired up with your list of jobs for the weekend. Okay, who doesn't love herbs? They're such flavour-packed plants and easy to grow. Tammy has an idea to get even more into any garden space.
If you live in an apartment with a small balcony or have limited space, you might not think you can grow fresh herbs and veggies. But don't despair, because I'm going to show you how you can make an upcycled herb garden that'll fit in the tightest of spots. Start with a tiered trolley. They're great for small spaces as they have a tiny footprint. Look for ones with netted baskets or shelves perforated with holes. I've had this one lying around for a while, but you can often find them in hard rubbish or in op shops. This trolley as is, we can't plant straight into it. The potting mix and water will go everywhere. To assist with that, I'm using some hessian to line the base of the basket, ensuring the sides overlap to prevent any potting mix from falling out. Now the hessian is quite porous. To help with that, I'm using this plastic liner that I've perforated with some holes to allow the water to flow through. Next, I'll fill it up with potting mix. Using a premium potting mix to ensure that it's got lots of goodies for your plants to thrive. So that's enough soil. I don't really want it spilling over the sides. This is going to be the bottom shelf. I'm going to work my way up and plant up the other tiers later. As it's the bottom shelf, it will be a bit more sheltered and the water's going to trickle and end up mostly here. That's why I'm choosing mint, because it loves shade and it will love the moisture too. I've got two types of mint. This is Vietnamese mint and I've also got the common mint. I'm planting them both because I like to use them. Vietnamese mint is great in salads and common mint is great just as a garnish. You don't have to use both of them. One in this container is absolutely fine. It's always a good idea to contain mint because it loves to spread, so this herb trolley is great. I'm taking off about 1/3 of the root ball. Don't be afraid to do this as mint is quite resilient and will go back just fine. And into the bottom of the trolley it goes. So for the next shelf up, the process is exactly the same. Hessian, plastic liner perforated with holes, and the potting mix. I'm planting a mix of leafy greens like lettuce and rocket in this layer. They don't mind a bit of shade, and I'm saving these upper layers for the sun-loving herbs and veggies. Because these trays are shallow, don't plant any crops with large root systems or deep tap roots, like carrots, sorrel or parsnips. They're all looking good, so into the trolley they go. For For the next layer up, I'm using nasturtium. And it will look really pretty on the trolley too. As your herbs are growing, if they become too unruly, simply cut them back. Or pick them more often to enjoy in your cooking. We're almost there, so let's clip this into place with the others. And finally, the top shelf. Oregano and chives are perfect for the top layer. They both love full sun and they're great in cooking. Oregano for your pastas and chives basically any time. I'm planting oregano near the sides so the foliage can trail down as it grows. Make sure the roots are well covered to ensure they don't dry out. Now with the chives, like any fresh herb, it's always good to cut as you need them because fresh is best. You can also separate these quite easily into clumps so you don't have to buy a lot to fill your tray. And don't worry if they look like they're wilting. Once you water them, they'll stand right back up. So that's the final one done. Let's put it on top and give everything a good drink. They're looking a bit thirsty. Wheel it around as the sun moves, or take it with you if you move home. You could even hang tools off the side. So, even if you're low on garden space, this vertical tiered garden will ensure you have fresh veggies and herbs close at hand and ready to go.
We all love colour in the garden, creating a tapestry of stunning flowers and luscious leaves. But Sophie's found a gardener with another colourful talent.
Anne Martin was born into an arty family. Both her parents were artists. She studied fashion and worked as a knitwear designer and then craft editor of Woman's Day magazine. But her great love is mosaics. Anne's creative home is 6 kilometres from the Adelaide CBD. The block is 1,560 square metres.
This house, it's a big old grand bungalow and it had so much ugliness. Everything that was not nice had to get decorated.
The native flora garden in the front is filled with grevilleas, flowering gums, lamandra and some large mosaic pots and bowls. So how did you get into mosaics?
Well, 20 years ago, I attended a little 4-session mosaic workshop and I made a little bird bath. I found it very harder and harder to get a coloured tile. So I'd done a little bit of hobby ceramics when I lived in Sydney, so I had a small knowledge of glazing. And I sourced some tiles and I started painting my own. If I'm working with green, I might work with 10 different greens, not just one. So then I get a much more interesting effect as an end result. I love the fact that I'm working with pieces and I combine the pieces to make a whole concept. I often get asked, did I have a plan with all of this? And the answer is absolutely not. I just made a start on the bits that offended me the most and it all evolved, and so 22 years later, this is the end result. And this is a perfect example. This is the first time I have done a mosaic that's not on a board. So it goes on the wall like a giant jigsaw. So there's about 7 pieces here. And the colour, the way the hand-painted tiles work is I get into really dark colour to create shadow. And people have said, am I going to do the rest of the wall? No, because I have to stop somewhere.
So does your garden have an overall theme?
Well, I've gone Mediterranean and holiday resort, if that's a useful mixture, because I just want to feel happy all the time. And of course, the ultimate Mediterranean piece de resistance is the pizza oven. It matches the table. By this stage, there's so much mosaic going on. I felt I needed some continuity. So the blue and white check cloth, table with food, oven with food.
This is an amazing space. Tell me what was here before.
There was a rotten window and a very ugly door, peeling paint, seriously ugly.
And now?
And now it's covered in cement board and decorated.
Wow.
But there was a request for a door, hence the 2 pencil pines.
But I just love this fountain, the way the mirror's basically the water.
Yes,
Incredible.
and this is a good spot for mirror because it's undercover, so it doesn't get sun on it, so it's not going to become a danger.
Okay.
Start a fire.
Okay.
We don't want that.
I didn't even think of that.
No.
And these are exquisite. The detail in that, in the colour and the feathers.
Yeah, so I just wanted 2 little bright spots of colour.
And these pears look good enough to eat.
Yes, these got very three-dimensional, and everyone has to pat them because they're just so tactile.
They are. The colour of them, the shape, they're beautiful. And the beautiful blue pot at the bottom. It's an incredible work of art.
Thank you. This panel was another ugly back wall of a garage. These are just from a $2 shop. Frangipani flowers, and these are incense holders.
Amazing.
So to me, they just looked like they could go in a mosaic.
And here we are, standing in a fish pond.
Standing in a fish pond. This used to be a real fish pond, and all this deciduous vegetation up here would just fall in, and one day I came out and the water had gone putrid, the fish had died, and frankly it was so depressing, so I thought, well, that's the end of that, so I'll do a mosaic pond instead. So I've got the fountain falling into the pond, and I've got the garden rising up into a garden mosaic, so more continuity there.
It's extraordinary.
Thank you.
Throughout your mosaics, birds are a common theme.
Well, I just love birds, and birds and gardens go hand in hand. I have families of magpies here, and the really interesting thing is when I put up a mosaic magpie, the real magpies come down and they hedge around it and check it out, and once they realise it's not real, they're fine.
It's not a threat to them.
No, it's not a threat, but they do check it out, which I just adore. So, Sophie, this is my studio where I do my work.
What an amazing space. And I can see it's not just about ceramics and tiles. There's wool, there's all sorts of things. Beads, you really are very talented.
Thank you. So my technique for creating pieces to go in a big mosaic, I start with my design. I'll put clear plastic over the top to protect the drawing from the glue. I then have this soft nylon fly wire mesh that goes on over the design, and I cover the plastic with that, and we can still see the design clearly. Then I do my tiling, and I use exterior PVA because it's waterproof, and it takes about 3 days to dry.
Okay.
And then I'll get a spatula and just run it under here to loosen the mesh off, and I end up with a bird like that ready to go.
So then you could just put other tiles up around it or
That's
trim
correct.
that off.
And I've grouted this already, and this is a galah that I have cut the mesh away. So this is a freestyle piece ready to go up on a wall.
And what do you get out of all your creations that you've installed?
A real sense of achievement, and I am quite proud of myself because it is just a hobby, and I've turned an ugly duckling into something that a lot of people can enjoy. And when the world's going mad, I come here and I couldn't be happier.
When you start your first garden, there's a few things you need to learn fast. The nuances of the location, good plant selection, and a little bit about weeds. But to keep your garden going over seasons and years, you need to master another important thing: compost. And guest presenter Jude wants to show you how.
Welcome to my place. It's on a sloping block in the Blue Mountains where I live with my family. In the backyard, we've got lots of projects on the go. We built a chicken coop, we've got guinea pigs, and any spare space I'm using to grow veggies. And whilst I love gardening, my little brother Charlie is the head chef of our family. To keep the garden cranking, I've been listening and learning to a lot of gardeners. And the one thing you hear about is compost. This stuff is gold. It adds so much nutrients, water, and is just the life of the soil. This was my first attempt at a compost system. As you can see, it's falling apart a bit. It's actually made from an old bed frame that we were chucking out. So, I've been hatching a plan for a new one. This is my new system that I made with a mate. It's a 2-bay system. Each one has about a cubic metre, which is a lot of compost. And it's made from recycled pallets, which are heat treated, so they're safe. It's got these really handy gates, which are just low enough where I can put a wheelbarrow in. And they've also got these handy little corrugated iron sheets attached to the pallets, which make a really good backing when you're digging into the compost. And they also heat it up. And today, I'm going to be using my new system to make a hot compost. It's a great way to get a lot of compost in a very short amount of time. Hot compost involves building a compost pile all in one go, which is at least a cubic metre in size. Any less than this, and it won't generate the heat required to break down the organic matter. And all the billions of microbes and fungi will be doing all the hard work. All those critters need food, air and moisture. And when it comes to the food, they need a mix of both greens and browns. Brown stuff is this carbon-rich material, like this cardboard, newspaper, straw and sticks. The greens are called greens, but they're not always green. They're nitrogen-rich material, such as this grass, coffee grinds and food scraps. I'm building the pile around this aeration tube. It's an idea to get oxygen into the centre of the pile. I've made it out of some chicken wire, but just be a bit careful when making it because it can have some sharp edges. My first ingredient is a carbon layer of sticks and twigs. The rough textures will allow excess water to drain. Also, just like the wire tube, bulk at the base will help oxygen get up and into the pile. As a general rule of thumb, you want at least twice as much of the carbon-rich material as the nitrogen-rich green stuff. And I'm not adding any weeds with seeds, bulbs or runners. When I'm adding a layer of carbon, I'm watering it in. I'm aiming for a pile that's moist, but not soaking wet. With any kitchen scraps, avoid meat, bread and dairy to make sure you don't have any rodent visitors. With bigger bits like this cabbage, it's best to break them up so the microbes can get in there and do their thing. Comfrey is a really great companion plant to a compost bin, but it could be a bit of a weed in your area, so make sure you check. I keep mine in check by pruning it and adding it to the compost. Adding diverse ingredients like this comfrey will help fire up the microbial life. Hot compost will easily get up to over 100 degrees if you let it. However, the desired temperature to cook it is around 60 to 65 degrees. At this temperature, it's killing off a lot of the pathogens, but not the good bugs. I'm finishing with a nice thick layer of straw, and in 2 weeks, I'll move it to my second bay and from there I'll be turning it every few weeks. Flipping the pile every few weeks gives me a chance to check if I need to add more water, and it also helps inject a lot of oxygen into this huge pile. The more you flip the pile, the quicker it will break down. I'll know when it's ready, because it'll be crumbly, slightly moist, and look like dark chocolate. And it's not just me who's excited. Charlie's cooked up a compost-inspired creation. What have you got here, Charlie?
Some compost cake with fondant worms kind of crawling all over the cake.
Oh, it looks yum. Look at little worms. And what's going on with the crumble on top? Is that to mimic the compost?
Yeah.
Yum. Home-cooked compost and home-cooked cake. I think this gardening cooking collaboration is working out a treat. Oh, thanks, Charlie. That's delicious.
We all know how valuable pollinators are in our gardens. And while some pollinators are very familiar to us, many go about their important work virtually unnoticed. Our next story introduces us to a scientist who's studying some of our unsung native heroes. Share the buzz with us, Kit.
Kings Park has always been a special place for me. It's where I'd go when I was a kid, like my parents would take me, and it's now become a really cool nature playground. I sometimes go back there and train. I really love circus. It's very almost meditative. So whilst I used to go to Kings Park a lot as a kid to play, and sometimes as an adult I go there to do circus, I go there for a very different reason most of the time. I'm Dr. Kit Prendergast, also known as the Bee Babette, and I'm a wild bee scientist. I study the native bees and I discover how many species there are and how we can help conserve them.
Melaleuca in general attracts so many species of native bees. When the Melaleuca's in flower, I always know to go there to find native bees. This bee here is Thyreus warrenensis. It's light blue with black spots. It has a very interesting lifestyle. So rather than forage for nectar and pollen for its offspring, what it does is it finds a nest of a host bee, and the host of this bee is Amygilla, often Amygilla chloroceania, which is the main blue-banded bee species here in southwest Western Australia. And it will lay its eggs in the nest of the host. And when its baby hatches out, it will eat the host larvae as well as the nectar and pollen provisions that the host put in the nest for its own babies. Now, because these are kleptoparasitic bees and they don't collect nectar and pollen for their own offspring, they go to the Melaleuca for nectar for themselves, for energy. This is a male Megachile monstrosa, and it's monstrously big. The females are even bigger. The thing about some Megachile males is they have expanded foretarsi. This is essentially big forearms. And the reason why they have these is they cover the female's eyes while they're having sex.
Apparently, I always liked bees. When I was a kid, I wrote a little book about some bees. This is when I was 3. Well, my mum did the writing, I did the beautiful illustrations and told her the story. It was about some bees that wanted to have a party. But I never particularly, I guess, thought I would become so passionate about bees. I was a huge horse lover when I was a kid, and I've always had lots of animals, dogs, cats, fish, hermit crabs, axolotls, bunnies, guinea pigs, all types of birds. I think it was year 10 and we were looking at like the development of chicks, and I would spend lunchtime with the chicks like by myself, like what a weirdo, just with the chicks. I loved biology so much, and I won the award in year 12 for topping biology. After I finished my undergrad degree, I know I wanted to keep on pursuing research. I went to a talk by the WA Naturalist Club, and a gentleman was showing photographs of native bees. I was sort of blown away by how many species there were, and I didn't realise that there were these amazing little creatures literally like in our backyards. And so my interest was really, piqued, and I thought it'd be really interesting to look at the biodiversity of native bees in southwest Western Australia. It's a biodiversity hotspot. We know that it's an incredible place for native flowers. Flowers need bees. Surely there's, a link between the native bees and the flowers here. We can really conserve the vegetation in our cities and design our cities to better support the native bees. But we need to know how to do that. We need to know what flowers they need. We need to know what factors influence how many species there are and how many of those bees there are in particular areas. And I was also thinking about honeybees. They are an introduced species. And so I wanted to look at how honeybees were interacting with the native bees. Were they harming them?
My research shows that, especially in residential gardens where there's not much native plants and flower, honeybees can harm the native bees, and they do that through resource competition. So it's not so much them, say, fighting the native bees. They will find the flowering resources and take the nectar and pollen to such an extent that there's not enough to sustain the native bee populations.
During my PhD, I was collecting native bee specimens in bushland remnants and residential gardens, and then going through every single specimen, looking at it under a microscope, determining what features it had. But there was one particular species that was really distinctive. It was in the genus Leoproctus, and I had only collected it on one plant species, Jacksonia sericea, at a couple of locations. And it had this protrusion on its face, and that's quite unusual for Leoproctus. It's always been a dream to, find a new species and describe one, and I was like, this species, it's very specialised, it's very unique. I, spent a couple of years looking at lots of specimens, looking at the key features, taking photographs, reading other taxonomic papers to look at how you would write a new species description, and then wrote it and submitted it to journals. I called it Leoproctus Zephyr. I named it after my dog, Zephyr, who is a Maremma dog.
There's 1,661 species of native bees that have been described in Australia. There's hundreds more that are undescribed, yet only 4, I believe, are on the federal threatened species list. So that means most of our native bees are not protected.
Unfortunately, taxonomy is not really funded, and it's not really taught, and we really need to invest in this because there's a lot of work to be done, and this is crucial. This is the backbone to so much, and the basic metric of biodiversity is how many species there are. But if we don't have people who know how to identify them, if we don't even have the species descriptions, then it's very hard to get a handle on biodiversity and conserve this biodiversity. And biodiversity is just so important to really ecosystems, life. It is life.
Are you ready? Set? It's time for Jobs for the Weekend. In cool areas, if you haven't already, get your broad beans in quick sticks. They need plenty of space, sow seeds at least 20 to 30 centimetres apart in double rows. Make space for some Corozema caudatum, the heartleaf flame pea. This native woody scrambling shrub can get by in dry, shady spots and gives fluorescent pink and orange flowers. Calendula seed can be sown now, directly where you want them to flower. Look for packets of mixed variety seed to increase the flower power. In warm temperate Australia, plant ranunculus corms now. Plant individual corms about 15 centimetres apart and with the claws facing downwards. Start to raise your mower blades gradually so the grass can grow longer over the cooler months ahead. Had your eyes on a particular rose variety? Get your orders in for bare root roses now to be ready for winter planting. Seeding now is Melicope elleriana, also known as the butterfly tree. A surefire favourite with butterflies and birds, why not try growing one from seed yourself? As temperatures drop, compost heaps can slow down. Give the microbes a wake-up call and give the whole thing a good crank to turn it over. Trace elements like zinc, magnesium and boron are micronutrients that citrus need, but can be washed out by summer rains. Apply now via watering can to set your plants up for years to come. In the tropics, flowering now is the blue ginger. With their incredible spikes of royal blue flowers poking out from glossy green leaves, this plant will light up any shady spot. Capsicums can be started now from seed. Look for smaller varieties for more reliable harvests, and don't be afraid of a bit of colour. If your heliconias have seen better days, get in there and give them a tidy up. Spent flowers and damaged stems can be pruned back now. In arid areas, you can continue to plant garlic now. Choose a spot with good airflow to prevent any disease problems. Keep the mulch light. As the danger of frosts grows, move sensitive pot plants indoors to beat the chill. Want a tough native that looks like nothing else? Meet Acacia aphylla. This abstract beauty doesn't even need leaves to deliver knockout visual impact. Have fun out there this week, gardeners. And don't forget, you can always catch up on missed GA episodes on iView anytime. Well, that's it, friends, but just for this week. I'll meet you here in the garden again next week. See you then.
We are in Bendigo. It's a town you might have heard of. It's famous for its gold rush, historic buildings and its art. But of course, we're here to see the landscape.
And there's some really good work being done by teams right across this beautiful country, caring for country, looking after waterways and some of our beautiful native fish.
Hey, Zach. And I'm here at Oz Harvest, a food rescue charity that cooks and packages food for hungry Aussies. Today I'm going to find out how gardening, food and community come together. And we head to Mbandwa to learn how plants play a part in keeping the languages of Central Australia strong.